Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Fourth Presbyterian Church here in downtown Chicago. My name is Emma Cox. I'm the music department manager. What a joy to have absolutely every one of you with us, in person and at home on the live stream, on this beautiful sunny September day. Gorgeous. If you'd like to take a moment to silence your cell phones, if you turn your program over on the back, you'll see a list of all of the upcoming Noonday performers. Next week, we have Leah Kang. Leah is an amazing performer. She's actually been here once before, but this time she's coming back as a competition winner, and she will be playing her program for us. That is going to be co-sponsored by the Musicians Club of Women, which is the oldest historic musicians guild here in the Chicagoland area. I had to think about that one. Did you see me? I was going through. After that, you're going to see Kathleen Monson and Rico Higuma. They have also been here before. This year, they are bringing you a brand new program. It's going to be based on the music of Judy Garland and Bing Crosby. So I'm very excited about that one. Judy is a personal favorite of mine. If you'd like to open up your program to the middle, you can learn a little bit more about today's artist. She is an incredibly talented organist. You can visit her website, learn a little bit more about Margaret, but she will be performing in May in Boston. So we're very excited that we were able to catch her on her tour. Feel free to take pictures. Please do take videos. You can tag our artists on social media. We love to spread their talent far and wide, but please make sure you do remain seated while you do take those pictures so we don't interfere with anybody else's sight lines. And as always, the Noonday program concerts here are sponsored by generous donations from each and every one of you. So if you're enjoying today, pat yourself on the back because you brought this here. Take one more moment to silence your cell phones and put your hands together for Margaret Martin Kvamme.
Thank you so much. It is a great thrill to be here and to play this magnificent instrument. And the space is just so stunningly beautiful. I keep discovering different corners of this campus, and I commend those of you who are members here and staff here for your really fine work in preserving this beautiful piece of history. I had the idea for this program, the theme, amidst a flurry of very strange headlines earlier this year, and I decided that this program would highlight distinct music from 3 neighboring countries and the friendships across our borders that we enjoy. I started with the fresh and joyful Jubilate by Southern California composer Craig Phillips. And now we will travel to Mexico City to enjoy a traditional classical sonata movement by Alfonso de Elías and a charming cradle song written by his son, Manuel. These composers were influenced by European traditions, but they infused their music with Central American melodic material. And then after that, another Mexican piece, but written by an American, Daniel Hooper. He lived for many years in the Phoenix area, where he was exposed to plenty of Mexican culture and those celebrations that feature the mariachi 2 trumpets playing in thirds. And Hooper found that this translates very well to the organ. On this amazing organ, we have, I think, no less than 8 big trumpet stops in the manuals to choose from. So it was a lot of fun to select which ones to use for which parts of that wonderful piece. So we travel to our Mexican neighbors to the south. Thank you. So here's this next piece, which is a tribute to this wonderful city. The American composer Dr. Pamela Decker has lived a lot of different places in the world and several different places in the United States, but she's living in Tucson. She's been there for, I think, about 20 years now, and she teaches composition and organ at the university there, University of Arizona. Along the way in her very prolific composing career, she has written pieces specifically celebrating different landmarks and different regions of the United States. This piece is from something called Home Sweet Home, sweet spelled S-U-I-T-E, and it highlights 5 different American cities, and Dr. Decker chose a different kind of organ stop to reflect that city's energy. And so for Chicago, she chose the reeds that have that wonderful buzzing quality. There are actual little metal, very thin reeds inside of the pipes. And she asked poet Jane Smith to write poems to accompany the pieces. So I'm going to read the poem. This is not the one that is in your program. That goes with the last piece that I'm going to play. But for the reeds, Chicago. Chicago, the city by the lake. Chicago, hub of land, sea, and air, drawing energy from within and without as it presides over the heartland. Skyscrapers assert their dominance as the sustenance of a nation flows through financial markets as well as supermarkets. Neighborhoods as distinct as fingerprints pulse with vitality from the South Side to Lakeshore Drive. The heartbeat of this metropolis is unmistakable, insinuating itself with snatches of sensuous solos slipping out into the street from some bluesy club or jazz joint, or perhaps with a melancholy melody on oboe or clarinet soaring from the choir loft of a candlelit cathedral. Expressive, passionate, unique. The reeds prefer the spotlight, a solo role, a glimpse into the soul. They stand alone, but they are still part of the whole, colorful and dramatic like the city itself. Listen to their voices. So now we're going to travel just a little bit north to my homeland. And the hornpipe was written by Canadian composer Barry Kvamme, who was a British expat but lived about 3/4 of his life in Canada. He taught at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, which is about an hour south of Toronto. And Kvamme was extremely prolific and composed daily right up until his final weeks of life earlier this year. Amongst his hundreds of shorter works for the organ were a set of 10 written in homage to his organ colleagues. And so Hughes hornpipe was Professor Hugh MacLean, a Canadian organist who taught at a neighboring university, the University of Western Ontario in London. And it's a charming and spicy piece. Kvamme always uses very crisp harmonies, but he really keeps our interest, and he will charm you with this hornpipe. Hornpipes are always in a triple meter, so you'll hear that very strong 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we will enjoy 3 impressions, meaning contrasting treatments, of the hymn tune called Kingsfold. And it can be found in several places in the hymnal, the purple hymnal in your pews, if you want to open perhaps to hymn number 182. 182 is the words, "I heard the voice of Jesus say." That's probably the text that's sung most commonly with this tune in Protestant churches. And there are 3 verses there, and there are 3 pieces, so maybe you can read along 1 verse per piece. Rachel Laurin wrote these along with many other wonderful works for organ. If you like these pieces, go onto YouTube and find others by her. They are really wonderful and very, very much performed. And she also performed often in the US, and most of her music was published by an American publisher. So we have many happy international friendships. I hope you enjoy this charming music from Canada. So you have some notes just under the title in the program of the final piece, and it was literally written for this place and for parts of this organ, which there are some pipes that we're using that are from 1914. There have been several rebuilds done on this organ, lots of wonderful work recently by the Quimby Company, but that oboe that you heard in the Chicago Reeds, that, for example, that is from 1914. I knew when I learned that I was playing here that I had to learn this piece. So it's been a great joy to do that. Sowerby was very young when he was commissioned. Probably he was 19, and then it was premiered when he was 21. He went on to write wonderful music for the organ, lots of it, and also some orchestral pieces. But this is just such a gem. And of course, for this time of year, and the wonderful poem by Mr. Bliss, who was a Canadian, is in your program, and it talks about all the colors of fall. There's also lots of motion in this piece that Sowerby depicts. And there are these themes that just are full of character. It's very cinematic writing. And so I wanted to demonstrate some of these. And thank you to Doug, who has been helping me a lot at the console and was my host this week. You're so fortunate to have him here at Fourth Press. I'm going to be having him take the microphone so I can play these for you. So I've given these themes just some little titles so we can latch on to them. So the first one I call the fanfare, and you'll first hear this in the pedal, but I'm going to play it with my left hand right now. And then the second one I'm calling the gust of wind. And then the third one is the whistling explorer. Imagine someone going through the woods whistling a merry tune. And the last one is bird call. So once again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for supporting this series, and have a wonderful autumn. Here it comes.